Good morning, dear friends. Friday, the 16th of Cheshvan, the 22nd of October, Erev Shabbos, Parshas Vayera, and we're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Maseches Shabbos, Perek Chi, the 9th chapter. We're on 83a. Likely we'll turn the page today to 83b. And we are on a slight detour, as discussed, from the subjects of Shabbos to the topic of Avodah Zarah, and more specifically, how an idol, a statue, and its accessories can convey ritual impurity, as we've alluded to. There's some variation in the understanding of our Gemara. Is it a biblically sanctioned or established impurity? Most opinions, certainly Tosfos, is that it's a derabanan, but the Chazal, the rabbis, want to ensure that there is a distance between Jewish people and Avodah Zarah, and so therefore, if we consider it ritually impure, it's another disincentive to even come into physical contact with Avodah Zarah and its stuff. What degree of impurity? Well, we've been introduced to a machlokes if the impurity emulates the impurity laws of a nida or the impurity laws of a sheretz. Ultimately, what emerged from yesterday's Gemara is that there are two ways to understand that machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim about exactly which halachas are applied to Avodah Zarah. There was some variation of varying possibilities of some of the specific instances. For example, the story, the big stone supported and carrying. So there was some, I would say, minor or small details that could vary extensively. And what came out yesterday is that the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan could be understood or is explained in two different methods. One following the opinion of Rabbah, which sounds like he's more inclined to embrace chumras, stringencies. If I recall correctly, Rabbah's viewpoint is that Rabbi Akiva is very, very inclusive of all the different possible hypothetical ways that impurity could be conveyed. Rabbi Elazar has a slightly more lenient reading of Rabbi Akiva, but again, it all boiled down to a few small nuanced differences. I don't want to rehash all of the specifics, all of the breakdowns, but we are going to continue slightly in that vein today. So again, we're still talking about the ritual impurity conferred by Avodah Zarah. And let's share the screen and take a look. Good morning, Doctor. Good Shabbos. Thank you for your service.
I don't believe I'm going to miss your course. You're not going to be here. The anti-Semitism course. Is that going to be taped?
God willing, we'll have it on recording. We'll have it on Zoom, and we'll have it in person.
Zoom, I can't.
Okay. Dr. Shabbat Shalom, thank you for volunteering.
Bye.
All right, pardon me, folks. Let's get the right site, the right space in the Gemara. 83a. Let's change the layout. Okay. And let's open up the commentaries. Meisvei. All right, so now the Gemara is going to ask a question. And this question is to challenge Rabbah's interpretation that is even more machmir, even more inclusive of restriction, even of the Evan. Well, let's take a look. So we're going to be introduced now to another brisa. It says as follows: Nachri v'nachris, a Gentile, Avodah Zarah, and Avodah Zarah, a statue, umisham sheha, and the stuff that are used in its in its worship, or in the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz, its accessories. They convey ritual impurity. Hein v'lo yeheseiton, but they are not conveyed if a person simply triggers it to move without direct contact. Hesed is similar to masa. We spoke about the possibility of a person to interact with an impure item without ever coming in direct contact. So you have maga, that's not M-A-G-A, maga in Hebrew, which is coming into contact with the thing, touching. And that's pretty much a universal way that impurity can be conveyed. But then you have other scenarios that we discussed yesterday. You could have carrying, you could have where you are on top of it. And now we're going to possibly find slight variation in the different ways of manipulating a thing. So let's just read Rabbi Steindal's here. We're going to we'll lean on his interpretation for the moment. They transmit impurity, but not their movement, meaning they do not transmit impurity to one who moves them. In other words, through them, when you carry something, you can cause it to move without direct contact. Rashi, hein v'le haseton, kasaka daitoch haseton mashma shehu satu, dahainu masa. The Gemara at this point understands that when we say haseton, you're causing them to move. We understand shehu satu dahainu masa, that you carried it. So we were introduced to the word masa. At this point, we think that Heseton is absolutely synonymous with Masa, says Rashi. And at this point, we think that the Gemara has a different interpretation than other times in the Talmud where the word Heset is used, where it means that the impure item is causing movement to you. So just to imagine, a person that's ritually impure can be carried, and he might carry something. So there's plausibly two options where there's some movement without a direct contact. Be'ezer Hashem, we'll talk a little more, but suffice it to say, the Brisa starts off with the first opinion that says that Heseton is not impure. It sounds like carrying Masa does not apply to Avodah Zarah, and this would be a problem. Well, let's read further, and then we'll see how it would be a challenge to Rabbi. Rabbi Akiva disagrees and says, Hein veheseton. Avodah Zarah conveys ritual impurity both with immediate contact as well as by being being moved without a direct contact. This is another brisa. So the Gemara right away is going to explain for us. So if we forgot yesterday's Gemara, not to worry. The Gemara is going to give us some explanation. Bishlema, this teaching would be good. Rabbi Eliezer Nicha. Rabbi Eliezer would be very comfortable with this teaching because that's what he teaches. The Chachamim say, Rabbi Eliezer, who I said generally explains the machlokes of the Rabbanan and Rabbi Akiva in a slightly more lenient way. So Rabbi Eliezer says the Chachamim say Masa is not at all a problem by Avodah Zarah, and Rabbi Akiva says Masa is a problem. So Bishleim Rabbi Eliezer Nicha, this beautifully portrays the understanding of Rabbi Eliezer. But it is not consistent with Rabba's explanation of the disagreements between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. In other words, this citation, this source, challenges Rabba's version, Rabba's understanding of how he explains our Mishnah on the machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim. Rashi, Diktani, because we just read in this citation, V'lo Heseton, the mashma, it means the lo metama b'masa, that Avodah Zarah does not convey ritual impurity by carrying it, which is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And later on, the Gemara is going to break apart and probe further in this text. But for now, based on our simple understanding, it works well with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabba would finds himself in trouble with his brisa, because he says that even the Chachamim, he says everybody agrees that carrying conveys to him. So how will Rabba defend himself? Omar Rabba says, now let's think. You're saying that this works well with Rabbi Eliezer. Well, let's probe a little further. Nachri v'nachris nami. Based on this, a Gentile. Now, I want to be careful here. Without going too much in length, the Chachamim made a gzeira that we should always presume that the impurities that are available occasionally to a Jew are always prevalent and always available to a Gentile. So is the halacha that a Gentile conveys ritual impurity through direct contact, but not through this carrying arrangement, not through masa. The Tanya, let's remind ourselves of a brisa. Dabra b'nei Yisrael. When the Torah records the teachings of impurity that are available by men and women, by human beings, by adults, it says, Dabra b'nei Yisrael. Pardon, just lost my earpiece. It says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, b'nei Yisrael mitamin beziva, ve'en goyim mitamin beziva. So the Brisa teaches us that the Jewish people convey zav, discharge kinds of impurity. They're both male and female discharges that could hypothetically convey ritual impurity. Ve'en goyim mitamin beziva, and Gentiles do not convey ritual impurity biblically through any kinds of discharges. But the Torah established that Gentiles should confer ritual impurity in all ways. Rashi, from here we see that Gentiles convey ritual impurity just as Jews do. This is not discriminatory against Gentiles. We're just saying that they have the same system of conveying ritual impurity, and that includes carrying the Eloi Mitamu Elabamaga, my Kizov and Lema Kinemesim. So basically, Rabbah says, you think this text is only a problem for me? It's problematic in general. The problems are so problematic, it's going to force us to revisit how we decipher this brisa. And once we revisit and decipher the brisa, Rabbah will say its interpretation supports Rabbah's viewpoint. So again, Rabbah would retort and say, now you think this brisa is comfortable for you? You also are challenged. How so? Because a Gentile conveys ritual impurity through carrying. And now Rabbah will say that my interpretation is consistent, would say Rabbah, to my reasoning, to the way I see it, which is Nachri v'Nachris, Hein v'Heseitan, v'Even v'Sama Shalahem. Hold on, so Rabbah would add words to the brisa. You read it as follows. Nachri v'Nachris, Hein, their contact, v'Heseitan, and when they carry, or Heset, this movement, v'Even v'Sama Shalahem, and even the stone that we talked about yesterday, convey ritual impurity. Avodah Zarah, how does Avodah Zarah work? He, v'Heseita, Avodah Zarah conveys ritual impurity both with direct contact and with some carrying contact, but not through the stone that we discussed. So in other words, what Rabbah is doing is saying that the brisa is so problematic. We need to reread it and read between the lines. And once we're reading between the lines, I think that it says exactly my opinion. Rabbi Akiva would say, and continuing with Rabbah's projection, reading of the brisa, Avodah Akiva says Avodah Zarah is even more inclusive. I want to go through this fast, and I'm debating if we should spend a lot of time here, if we should try to zoom past it. Let's see. Hold on. Rabbi Elazar. So we have a elusive, obscure, not fully explained brisa, and because it's written in shorthand, in a sense, Rabbah will say the brisa is actually supportive of his viewpoint, and Rabbi Elazar would be able to project into the brisa his viewpoint. In other words, it's a wash. Nishtahe, the brisa cannot be used as a challenge to Rabbah's interpretation. Let me just read through this fast, and then we'll.
Rabbi, can I just ask one quick question?
Yes.
I need to understand when Rabbah talks about nochri v'nochri, hen, meaning
Yes.
the contact with a goy, with a Oved Avodah Zarah.
Yeah. So in other words, yes. So in other words,
we're not talking about. We're talking in addition to the actual. Let's say.
Now we're talking about Gentiles too. Yes. So for example,
the physical contact with them.
Yeah. So Dr. Stamler, you're a dentist. So 2020, 2021, you're treating a patient. Well, if they're Jewish, what probably happens? They probably convey ritual impurity to you, or maybe you to
That's
them.
okay.
But you know what? If they're a Gentile, they also convey ritual impurity. So there's a lot of equality in this regard. So a Jew and a Gentile ultimately is alike in this regards. But halacha here. But now for the moment, we're probing the ritual impurity conveyed by a Gentile. Doctor?
Yeah, but this, whether it's a patient or anybody,
I know.
they have no. But so they're wearing it Salem,
Right.
okay? So right away, what does it? What does that mean?
But even the Salem is not a problem today.
Purity, ritual impurity. Or they went to a funeral. They went to a funeral yesterday, and they told you they went to a funeral.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know. Better yet, you don't even know they went to a funeral, or that beneath the chain is a big Salem. Why are we concerned with that? How realistic is it?
In 2021, not at all. Not at all. But in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, you wanted to bring Bikurim, or you wanted to go up to Jerusalem, or you wanted to be Ola Regel, or you wanted to have a meal with your, together with your good friend the Kohen, and you're going to share a table. Well, then you do need to be mindful about ritual purity. So again, ultimately, just to remind everyone, much of our discussion today is, I don't want to say it's hypothetical, but it's Hilchasil Mashiach. It'll be relevant with Hashem's help when Mashiach comes. But in our present state, in the diaspora, it's not relevant. In other words, you don't need to be worried about it. I was just using the doctor as an instance to appreciate that just as a Jewish patient would convey ritual impurity through a variety of interactions, well, the same thing as a Gentile.
Simply shaking hands with someone.
Correct, shaking hands. Maybe even if you go to what do you call those? In the Far East, there are places where you can get a ride and a person.
The rickshaw.
Yeah. So
Rabbi.
Yes.
Rabbi, but there's a whole other question. I don't know how important it was at the time of the Talmud, but today, what is an idol worshiper? I mean, even the Arabs.
Can I stop you for a moment?
Yeah.
In the time of the Gemara, no one had that question because they knew what an idol worshiper was. Probably anybody that wasn't a Druzi or maybe some forms of Christianity, but the average person was a pagan practitioner. If you lived in ancient Iraq under Persian influence, the Zoroastrian people were Oved Avodah Zarah, and Buddhist people. I know that today, when you speak to a Buddhist person, they'll probably tell you that they actually don't worship Avodah Zarah. So I don't want to go there. But it's a good question. It's a good question. It's a question that has application in 2021, not about ritual impurity, but other matters, because you're not really allowed to support Avodah Zarah, and there are other restrictions with how you interact with Avodah Zarah. So our present discussion is somewhat focused on ritual impurity, and it's more academic at the moment, but that doesn't mean that there's no relevance in defining Avodah Zarah. And Rebbeinu, a good example of where this is complicated, is that when we learned the Meseches Avodah Zarah, we talked about times that business might be restricted on a holiday. And so the question is, if you're a Jew, are you allowed to sell? Are you allowed to take advantage of the high volume of sales that take place after November until January, in the beginning of January? And if you're a Jew, are you allowed to have a company that puts up lights on all the trees? And by the way, I think the beach.
Rabbi, I was thinking of the other end of the spectrum. People like Baha'i that believe in everything. Should you invite them to say? Anyway, okay.
Well, that's not a question of the Seder, but there are questions. It's a good question. The poskim are full of this, and generally speaking, there's a question about Christianity. Is Christianity considered Avodah Zarah or not? And there's a machlokes of the different poskim, and I think it's possible. Again, I don't want to go into it. I spent more time in my life studying Judaism than Christianity, Baruch Hashem. But there may be distinctions between different denominations. Some denominations are much more into, anyways. So it's a good question. It's a big question, and it is a relevant question, and it is discussed. But our Gemara is pretty straight.
You could extend that, Rabbi, to within Judaism and Yiddishkeit when you say different denominations. Well, several who don't accept the other denomination as being anything more than.
But I wouldn't claim that I wouldn't claim, to my knowledge, that any denomination that's considered part of Judaism, but now I have to is considered avodah zarah, with the exception of,
Well,
and
they're
I don't
get- they're
consider
getting
part of.
pretty- they're getting
Hold on, with
pretty
the
close.
exception of a person that calls himself a Messianic Jew, and I don't consider Messianic Jew Judaism. It's just repackaged Christianity. So, but none of the denominations of Judaism, as much as I may disagree or maybe even reject the principles of their faith or the lack thereof, I wouldn't label them I wouldn't label them avodah zarah, and I wouldn't.
They're getting
Anyways.
pretty close, to say Kaddish
let's-
for a terrorist, to me, is
That's
worse
not-
than
that-
wearing
that
a toilet.
that could be repulsive, but it wouldn't have the halachic facts of avodah zarah. Anyways, let's stop there
Okay,
before I
let's
get
not
myself
go
in
there.
trouble. Dr. Stammer, you're muted. We want to hear your.
Thank you. Historically, I think from what I know or read, it depended where the Rabbanim, the poskim lived. If they lived
Yeah.
amongst Christians or if they lived
said it-
amongst Muslims. And that's
We-
why
we-
you had different opinions by the Rambam and
Yes, we've shared that here in the past. Ironically, I think. Yeah. Anyways, yes, indeed. So it also depends on where you live and which kind of Christianity you were introduced to and how intimately aware you were. Because if you just met a person in passing and you said, "Hey, there's no statues and there's no whatever," but if you probe deeper into their faith. But anyways, all of that is not immediately relevant for our present discussion. Our present discussion is with the ritual impurity conveyed by statues, and now we were introduced to a brisa, which parenthetically introduced us to the fact that a Gentile too could convey ritual impurity. But again, in the diaspora, that's not much of a problem because we are all presumed ritually impure. And if we want to,
today,
yeah,
though,
Dr.
also, in the recent years, there was this issue with the shaitels, with the hair coming
Yes.
from India. And
But again,
the
that-
question was, are they of the avodah zarah or not, and can you use a shaitel? So that was a question that came out that's in a way connected to this.
Yes. Sorry, 1 second.
You have non-Jewish staff cleaning synagogues, preparing
That's not a problem.
stuff, serving
That's
food.
not a problem. But it might be a problem in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. But anyways, okay, let's get back into the Gemara for a moment. Again, I want to remind us of what we are discussing and what we aren't discussing. We're talking about ritual impurity. The Indian shaitel is a fascinating topic, but again, it's more a question in Mesachas avodah zarah about having hana from avodah zarah, and is it actually part of a worship? It would probably go into the category, assuming it is problematic, of umisham sheha as far as ritual impurity is concerned. Conversely, there were those that said it's entirely prohibited, and there were those that would said we would be very happy to pick yours up. And all right. So again, we had a brisa which seemed to challenge Rabbah. Ultimately, Rabbah showed how the text was more broadly obscure and needing some additional language. And once we uncovered its obscurity, we showed that both Rabbah and Rabbi Elazar could project and see their perspective in this text, and therefore this text cannot be used conclusively to dislodge and to challenge Rabbah. Again, just to read the words fast, Rabbi Elazar would read it in his style, Nachri v'Nachris, Hein ve'Seitan, Devin Misamashlam. Gentiles, Rabbi Elazar would say, are strongly convey ritual impurity, both directly and through carrying and through the stone. Avodah zarah, but when it comes to avodah zarah, he v'lo Satan. Avodah zarah conveys ritual impurity with direct contact, but not through being carried. Rabbi Kiva, avodah zarah, he v'Satan. Rabbi Kiva says, yes, avodah zarah, and through transportation, through movement, can also convey ritual impurity. So we're at a draw once again.
Rabbi, does
Now-
that
Go ahead, yeah.
does does that restrict non-Jews from washing the Shabbos dishes?
We're talking about ritual impurity. Ritual impurity was a matter of great importance for Jews living in Israel and adhering to interacting with sanctified spaces and stuff.
Well, they're
Today-
touching our dishes.
Our dishes, as beautiful and holy and special they are, your dishes aren't pure. And you don't have to worry about a Gentile because you've already conferred and conveyed any possible ritual impurity that you might be afraid of your Gentile. So in the long story short is no. This is nothing to, this would not preclude any of the present services that you might hire for a Gentile, including sweeping a shul, cleaning a shul, building a shul, cooking your food. There are other issues with cooking food. I don't want to, but assuming that it's Bishul Yisrael and Pasi Yisrael, you could absolutely have a Gentile kneading your chalado and making your chicken soup and making your matzah balls. All of that is entirely okay as far as
But not okay as far as wine.
Wine that's not mavushal, you're correct. But again, that's not about purity and impurity. That's about additional rabbinic enactments to discourage interaction that could lead to intimacy and deepening marital bonds between Jews and Gentiles, which Judaism strongly discourages. All right. Maskif Larav. Go ahead.
No, they could knead your challah, but they can't do a hafrashas challah, right?
They could not do a freshest challah. That is correct.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that.
All right. Good. Maskif la Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi drops a bomb on Rabbah and Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbah and Rabbi Elazar both interpreted the word hain to mean them. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz, then we'll take a look at Rashi. Rav Ashi strongly objects to this explanation. Let me just show you Rashi for a moment. Rabbah, Rabbi Elazar, both Rabbah and Rabbi Elazar, he challenges some basic definitions. You know, I was taught by my friends that are lawyers that in a contract, before you get into any of the specifics of the agreements and all the different things, the first thing you need to do is define the words, establish what the terms mean. And so we have a whole machlokes, whole conversation, and Rav Ashi wants to now go back up and say, hold on, let's talk about what the words mean. And he challenges both Rabbah and Rabbi Elazar. He challenges both of their assertions. The Brisa uses the word. The Brisa. I'm sorry.
Can a shaliach be a Gentile?
What's a shaliach?
I mean, if someone wants to send a shaliach, for instance, with a get or with a ketubah.
That's a very, very good question. Admittedly, beyond the scope of our present Talmud, but you know where we'll talk a lot about it? In Masechet Gittin Bezrat Hashem. Masechet Gittin, where there's a lot of, no, I'm serious, because there's a difference between a courier and a halachic messenger who has agency to represent your duties, responsibilities, and power of attorney. And so there are areas where you need to have either a person's own halachic involvement or halachic power of attorney through a shaliach. And over there, it's a big question: can a Gentile? I mean, the fast answer would be that when it comes to areas where you need a halachic power of attorney, usually a Gentile cannot be a shliach. But that doesn't do justice to the complexity of the issue.
Rabbi, the obvious question is if he's ever called for an aid, that he delivered it. It has to be a Jew.
Okay, really, Gittin is a complex, important subject. So
we have to stay married for a while longer. Okay.
Well, we have to. I want to stay married to Shabbos for now, and then we'll. All right. Maskiv la Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi challenges and says, "What is the meaning of the word they or them? It should have just said." Well, let's see Rabbi Steinsaltz. It would have been sufficient to say that their movement transmits impurity. The fact that the Gentile himself convey and are ritual impure is obvious. So apparently the word they is emphasized to teach us an additional halach. My hain, or let's see Rashi. If the word hesed, which we've been translating interchangeably as to carry but not come into direct contact, mashma lahu, the inference is shehesitu achirim, that other people carried it. The hainu masa, that would be synonymous with carrying. The pure carried the impure, and thus the pure became impure. The carrier is the person that's becoming impure. The thing that he's carrying is ritual impurity. My hain ve'seitan. My hein v'lo Satan. So Rashi says, what is the meaning of these questions of them and their movements? If it's coming in, if the word hein means that the impure thing conveys ritual impurity, that's covered in kindergarten. It doesn't even need to be present in a Mishnah. Because if their immediate contact is not problematic, well, then there's no chance that carrying is problematic. So by saying that carrying alone is problematic, that already covers all of the obvious bases. And therefore, Rav Ashi says we must revisit the word hein, them. What does them mean? What does, right? We have there were some famous moments in history where definitions were very central to the news cycle. And I'm thinking about a story in the 90s where the meaning of words. Anyways, my hein, Lama Rav Ashi hachi kamar. Rav Ashi says we need to now revisit what it means hein. Goy v'goya. Here is how you read it. A Gentile. Bein hein. Hein doesn't mean contact. It means bein hein shehisitu es acherim. Uvein acherim shehisitu oisan. It means whether they were carried or whether they carried. You could be the guy pushing the what is it called, rickshaw, or being pushed in the rickshaw. Whether you were the one that was manipulating or you were being manipulated, either way, the Gentile conveys ritual impurity. Or in the case of Dr. Stamler, whether you were the one that was cranking the bed or pushing the button to shift the bed so that the dentist could have access to the mouth, or whether that you were the patient, whether the patient, whatever, you get my point. Whichever side you are on the interaction, they both convey ritual impurity, and that's what it means, hein. Dr. Hammer?
Is there any meaning to the choice of hein there rather than haim, which two sentences later is taken for the plural for the masculine rather than the feminine above?
My sense is that in the Talmud, there is less of a particularity about gender in the word hein. I believe hein in the Mishnai context is not like in the biblical Hebrew and in conversational Hebrew. So I don't think there is a deal. Hein here means hein.
I'm more intrigued by the change from the flea and the fleet to
Right.
Goy and Goya.
Uh-huh.
Must have been
That's
different
interesting.
times. Must have been different times, but I don't.
Either different times, or you know what the alternative is? We know that there was a lot of censoring between the words goy, nachri, akum, kuti, and it actually causes a great deal of problems for halachis who are exploring the Talmud, and we want to have a precise definition. As we know, the word a legal text that's singling out a Gentile with a different halach or discussing their status was uncomfortable for authorities that were un-Jewish and had influence over editing and censoring the Talmud. And so there are a number of words that are used somewhat interchangeably because of either external censorship or an internal process of, sanitizing a text. And so over here, I'm not sure. Let's just go back. Rav Ashi says goy v'goya, but our original text said nachri v'nachris. You're correct. So that would indicate that the original text used, let's say, the language nachri v'nachriya. That was a brisa, and then a later era, maybe Rav Ashi, who's already in the end of the Gemara's period, maybe the common. I'm sure this is discussed. I'm just responding freestyle over here, or without vigorous investigation. It's plausible that the word goy and goya would have been used by Rav Ashi, whereas in the Mishnah the word nachri and nachriya would have been more common. Doctor.
Apropos, you mentioned the 1990s. The label Jewish versus Hebrew, I remember seeing on documents and government stuff and things and surveys with religion, Hebrew rather than Jew or Jewish. And then somehow over the time, it became rather consistent that we are, quote, Jews or Jewish. So I don't know how that happened, why it happened, whatever. But it's just interesting.
And to add to that, I'm fairly certain that our friends from the former Soviet Union will confer that the Russian word for Jew is something, a variation of the word Ivrei, or which is the word Hebrew, right? So, but here, there's, by the way, today's Gemara is so a little bit dense, so I don't mind having some of our tangents here. But basically, there are different words for Jews. Jews, which is from the word Yehudi, Hebrew, which is from Ivri or Ivrit, which is associated with Avram Avinu. And then you also have Israelite, Bnei Yisrael. And so we have three, maybe more, but three common and still occasionally used names. Dr. Hammer, I have a feeling that as the state of Israel developed, Hebrew became more associated with the state of Israel as opposed to the religion of Jews. And I have a feeling that may have been connected to the evolution away from Hebrew to Jew. That may not be correct. Of course, again, Hebrew, Ivri goes back to the earliest of times, Avraham Ivri, and the etymology of the word Ivri itself has different interpretations. Either that Avraham Avinu was set apart from everyone, Me'ever, he was on one Ever and everyone else was on the other side. Me'ever lanahar yashva avotechem, which the word Hebrew or Ivri in its original word meant Jews as they are set apart from all others. Yehudi or Yahud, which I think is the Arabic description of a Jew, comes from the sub community of Jews, the Jews that developed after the fall of the first Beis Hamikdash, where they were primarily from the kingdom of Judah and Yehuda. And of course, you talk to archaeologists and students of history, you have the two kingdoms. I mean, it's in the Tanakh too, the two kingdoms. So Yehudi today means Jew, but once upon a time it meant a Jew from the southern kingdom, or the Jews that were the descendants of the southern kingdom, which today is the totality just about of the Jewish people. So anyways, we lost the doctor, but we got his comments, so he'll have to listen to the recording if he wants. All right, back to the Gemara for a moment. Well, one last question is it offensive to call a Jew, or is it offensive to call a Jew a Hebrew? I mean, I don't think so, but you may have some people that don't like being labeled at all, or a person should, Doctor, what do you think? Dr. Staunler.
Well, first of all, I would say it depends how you say it. The connotation, I think, makes a difference. Look, today, I think, without going too far into it, the difference between a Jew and an Ivri or an Israeli or whatever, I think you'd have certain sections within Jewish society, without going into specifics, who would not want to be considered an Israeli or a Hebrew, would rather want to be considered a Jew, a Yid.
Right.
Which is our own doings.
Right. So you're right. Yehud, Jew, you're right, comes from Yid, which I think most
Yid comes from a Jew.
Right.
In the Soviet Union,
it was a Jid. It was a Jid in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
But Jid was not
the word Yevrei was an official designation, and you carried this label in your passport, so it was accepted officially. In the everyday life, it was derogative. It wasn't as offensive as Žid, but still people avoided the use of it and use all kinds of euphemisms instead. I think it somehow changed after 1968, but I'm not sure that changed significantly. The connotation still, a negative connotation still lingers.
So was there any scenario where Jid was a positive or neutral? or Żyd
No,
was.
no,
So a
I
Jew
don't
wouldn't.
think so. Actually, in Polish, I think Żyd is a neutral designation for a Jew, but in Russian, it's always offensive.
Because I guess if a Jew was talking about themselves, they might call themselves a Yid, not a Żyd.
Right.
Right. Interesting. Very interesting.
I'll tell you a story. I mean, when I was in high school, I had a gym teacher here in the States. I was here for 2 years before I went back to the army in Israel. And I couldn't understand. He called me Isaac. Isaac is not my name. I didn't know what it was until decades later when I found out that Isaac is a derogatory name for a Jew.
Really?
He was an anti-Semitic.
Wow.
He used to call me Isaac, do this, and I couldn't understand why he's calling me Isaac.
I had similar experience. The Russians, when they didn't want to use the term Jew, they would address a Jew naming him Abraham.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was kind of a generic name for a Jew or a synonym.
It's funny because in Jewish literature, they portray the name used for a Jew as Moshe. There's a lot of story. There's a lot of stories about a Jew being called a Moshka, but that's not reflective of real life experience. Maybe that was in Polish. Maybe that was in the Polish story. Yes.
What's very offensive and used commonly here is to Jew somebody down when you're negotiating a price. Used openly, and
To Jew them
people don't
down, to Jew
understand
them.
why they shouldn't.
Yep. Yep. And then the question is how to respond. Do you maybe some people don't even realize, and I think unfortunately the Jewish people, we carry a little bit of this possibly with other ethnicities, maybe not today, but not long ago, where you don't always know what is considered respectful and what is considered offensive. And so again, today everyone's offended by everything, but it's helpful to sometimes things change and it's good to learn what's considered derogatory or not. For example, today, I don't think calling a Gentile a goy is considered respectful, although once upon a time, I think it was perceived or intended as a neutral description of someone that's not Jewish. But today, I don't believe anybody would be pleased to be called a goy. And I have a feeling that it's actually good news, because it means that being Jewish is so popular. Who wants to be labeled as not Jewish?
Look,
Right,
as far as euphemisms go, and the Gemara, Oto Aish, we don't even, they were afraid or did not want to even specify, what do you call them?
Yeah.
But they
and what do we? And sometimes
Yeah.
it says Yeshu, which stands for Yamach Shemoi V'Zichroi.
Yeah.
But it's a play on the name that. Okay, let's do a little more Gemara. Maskiv Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi gives a challenge. My hain. Let's redefine. Let's probe what the word hain means. As Rashi explains, hain is so obvious it shouldn't need to be said unless it's teaching us something else. And so therefore Rashi says Hachi Gamar. When the Brisa says hain, it doesn't mean they're contact. It means they are the ones that are moving something else. Bein hain sheisitu asacherim, bein acherim sheisitu oisan tmei. Avodah Zarah. So when it comes to a Gentile, whether you carry them, they carry you, that experience, the movement that is triggered by or to a Gentile conveys that ritual impurity. Avodah Zarah. Now, what about a statue, an idol? Sheisitu acherem, if someone else carries it. I'm sorry. Sheisitu acherem, if a Avodah Zarah carried you to Hirim, you are pure. Acherim sheisitu oisa, but if others carry it, like our example of the statue that landed on the basket, tmeim, ritually impure. I know there's a big question that you want to ask. Hold on. Misham sheha, the accessories of Avodah Zarah, bein hein sheisitu asacherim, bein acherim sheisitu oisan tahirim. Them, whether they carry or are carried, they are tahar. This is the first opinion of the Rabbanon, that a Gentile conveys ritual impurity whether carrying or carried. Avodah Zarah, according to the Rabbanan, conveys ritual impurity when being carried, but not when carrying. Rabbi Akiva says no. Goya, the Avodah Zarah, a Gentile man or woman, and Avodah Zarah, bein hein sheisitu asacherim, bein acherim sheisitu aisan, whether they carried you, you carry them, timeim. Misham Shehal, says Rabbi Akiva, bein hein sheisitu acherim, bein acherim sheisitu aisan taharim. They are universally pure unless you came into immediate contact. So we've now turned the Bryce on its head. Now hein does not mean direct contact. It just means they're the ones doing the carrying. Now, what's the question that everyone's wondering? Have you ever gotten a piggyback ride by a statue? Has a statue ever adjusted your... It's a problem. They don't move, right? And so how could you possibly be carried by an Avodah Zarah? That's a good question. So the Gemara asks, Avodah Zarah, hold on. Something sounds very off. Bishleim acherim sheisitu aisam, with Avodah Zarah, I understand the scenario where you could carry it. Mishkachas la. Elohi sheisitu acherim heichi mishkachas la. Have you ever heard of an inanimate object carrying you? I guess today we could imagine you have an automatic drone that you designate as an Avodah Zarah. And I guess we could imagine a scenario, but the Gemara wants to know, what is that? Rashi, have you ever heard of an inanimate object moving something else? Omar Rami Braid Rav Yeva Keditanan. We have a scenario. Hazav bekaf mazayin. The oichlin umashkin bekaf shniya. Kara hazav tmein. What if you have an individual who's ritually impure on a big weight, and on the other side you have food? If the human is heavier than the stuff, and therefore he causes the stuff to go up, tmeim, they become ritually impure. Karu hein. But if the guy is standing on his scale, and then they put a bunch of food on there and it pick them up, tahirim, the items remain ritually pure. And so therefore, how would that work in our scenario? So I guess similarly, you're standing on a scale and a statue and a Avodah Zarah is placed on it. The Avodah Zarah isn't moving itself, but it is causing by its weight to move you. And that's what it means. Sheisitu oisan, that Avodah Zarah is moving you. I think we're going to pause over here for now. We didn't cover a lot of ground, but we certainly covered some groundbreaking subjects, like getting a ride by an Avodah Zarah. We spoke about Jewish names, being called a Jew. We spoke about all different types of interaction with people of other nationalities and other backgrounds. With Hashem's help, that will all be elaborated at much more at length in Maseches Avodah Zarah. Be'ezer Hashem, on Sunday, we will really graduate from this topic, because we're going to be up to the next Mishnah just around over here, down here somewhere. And so Be'ezer Hashem, we'll have that soon. For now, I want to thank all of our dear friends for joining us. I want to just mention the names that we're davening for, and then some closing remarks from our dear members of our Chabura. Bear with me just a moment. We are davening for speedy healing for Leah Basrita, Chaim Baruch, Eliezer ben Rusa Esther, and we're davening for Nisim Chaim ben Mazel. Nisim Chaim ben Mazel is the father of a dear friend who comes to Shul every year for many, many years, and he's unfortunately in a coma and was non-responsive. And Baruch Hashem, since we started davening for him, the family says that they're starting to see slight improvements, slight movement. Hashem should hear our prayers and send the Yeshua to everyone that is in need, and we only have good news. And again, thank you all for being here. Rebero, go ahead.
Rabbi, I have the same problem here as we had with defining minimum of stuff that you could do. Why are we having all this discussion of how we contact with the idol and how not? Period. Are we trying to find a way to carry an idol?
No, we're trying to know exactly when you're in trouble, when you're not in trouble, exactly when you need to go to the mikvah, when you don't need to go to the mikvah. This is this is real. If it was vague, it wouldn't be real. But something that's real has details and specifics.
No, but why not just say any contact and finish?
Because there are some. Well, because there are more simple contacts, and there's more complex and sophisticated ways of coming in contact. And we need to know, is it a problem? Do you need a dunk in the mikveh? Can you serve this tuna fish sandwich to your Kohen friend? Or, if it's touched by if it's carried on a basket, or if the tuna fish sandwich carries a Gentile, don't ask me how. But, so these are relevant issues that need to be clarified. It's a little bit hypothetical, but every hypothetical is only imaginary till it happens, and then someone needs to know the answer. And because ultimately the Torah is real and specific, and even the halachas that we aren't practicing today or don't have practical application, when we study them, our minds are becoming enmeshed and interwoven with divine wisdom, which reflects parallel, great, deep, holy secrets and connections to Hashem in a profound and wonderful way. And therefore, we spend our time
what's
going.
behind my question is the
I thought you were going to tell me what's behind you is the recent birthday girl, right? She had a birthday. Your wife had a birthday recently, didn't she? Or am I mixing things up?
To produce artificial pork. Why go there?
What's the problem?
No, but why do you want to make something that looks like pork and tastes like
We're
pork?
not trying. We're not trying to give a hechsher to something.
This is a consequence of these, in my humble opinion.
No, we're not giving a hechsher. We need to know exactly the. Anyways, good question. Chazon lamoed, doctor.
On the lighter side, though, Reb Irwin, I want to ask the rabbi if it's idol worship to have a T-shirt emblazoned
with your idol,
the image of a 44-year-old quarterback who was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
It does not convey ritual impurity.
It's not ritual impurity. Okay, good, because I think it's an important issue in 2021, which might be the last year he's playing. Okay.
Is that Tom Brady?
Beryl, one answer to your question may be that the fact that people are now getting, for instance, things that are similar in taste to pork or to shrimp or to part of cheese reduces the temptation for people who always wanted to know what it tastes like. They may be tempted to taste it. So that may
there's a precedent in halacha, in the laws of kashrus. There's a discussion about if the udders of a cow have the flavor of milk, or if there's some kind of fusion between milk and meat. And there's also a discussion. You talk about the appearance of not kosher. There's such a thing as maris ayin appearance. We talked about in our Gemara, and there's even a question about if you're serving steak and you have margarine or non-dairy milk, are you allowed to put it? And in the Shulchan Aruch, it's clear that at a time where it was rare, you'd have to put very strong visual evidence that is not what it looks like. So if you're having milk made out of another thing, you have to have some of the nuts or whatever on it. Today, I don't know if that's the case, because today you go to a kosher restaurant, there's so many non-dairy options that it's not certain that would be a problem, but it's discussed. Doctor?
Just a quick thing for Beryl. Last month in the OU publication, which gives a hechsher, and Rabbi Kanak, there's an article about why, although they give the hechsher to Beyond Burger and all these meat products, that with the equally non-kosher contents of these new bacon or pork product, they're not doing it for now. They're just
I saw that, and I was surprised. I was surprised they're not going to give a hechsher on it.
But he also said probably over time, realistically, people will eat it because they'll know that we're not doing it, not because it's really not kosher, but because we don't think it's a good idea. And there'll be enough people, like herd immunity, so to speak, that we will ultimately land up, I think, if I'm correct, Rabbi, if you read the article, approving of it. I think that was
very interesting.
Interesting. I also found it interesting. It's either, but anyway.
Anyways, all right. There's a lot more to talk about. But right, Shlomer Chumash. We invite everyone to end this link, and you're invited to immediately rejoin to study today's Chumash. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Shabbos. And take a look at the commentary on the verse when Hashem says Erdena ve'era. I need to go down and check out what's happening in Sodom. Important, fascinating conversation. Does Hashem need to go anywhere? Does Hashem not know everything? So it's one of those big psukim that trigger a lot of good conversations. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.